Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Midnight Dark Stories. The night is deep, the stars are hidden, and it's the perfect time for us to gather here and dive into the mysterious and thrilling world of tales. Prepare to be spellbound as we uncover the secrets that lie in the darkness. Let's begin this enchanting journey together. Brandon just laughed and said, "But yeah, I work with him. He's weird, but you just need to smack him up a bit. And he doesn't try that weird on you." I was pissed and kept trying to explain to Brandon how severe this guy was and that it wasn't a small issue. But Brandon just kept shrugging it off and said many people had paid him visits and put him in hospital. A few times even, and something about him being kidnapped at one stage and having to pay money to families threatening to kill him. He also said that the cops had paid him multiple visits and there was a charge against him at one stage. But he paid his fees, and maybe on some registry. But he still has everything that he had before. None of it was satisfying to hear, and I wanted to hear that he was running in prison, or even dead. After hearing this, though, I just refused to drive him all the way there, and I dropped him off at the top of the street. I said good luck and I just sped off out of there. I was so angry driving home that he was still out there and even walking around. Eventually, though, I got home and I just kind of passed out and slept in late. When I woke up, though, I had a missed call and also a voicemail. I listened, and it was Ryan. I'm assuming that Brandon told him that I gave him a ride and perhaps the things that I said. He said that I needed to call him back so that we could talk. That Brandon was in bad health and that he needed to talk to me. I was shocked and, honestly, a little bit scared. Hearing his voice seriously gave me chills, but I paced around my apartment and eventually decided to call him back. But when I called back, I just completely lost it. I screamed at him, called him a pedophile and told him that I was actually going to kill him. I reminded him of what he did, all while swearing and describing how I wanted him dead. He eventually hung up on me, and I immediately blocked the number and started mentally preparing myself. I honestly thought that I just started a war and told myself that I needed to get ready for him to come, that this guy would try to kill me because I wanted to expose it. Luckily, no one ever came, though, and my paranoia eventually drifted off. I would move a couple of years later and can say that I've not heard anything on that name again. I also pray that I never do. Please, though, the people who listen to this, if you have kids, watch out for them. Hey, there are real psychos out there. And even though you think that you're well put together, things can happen to you, or the ones that you know, real quickly. I was ashamed for a long time for not coming forward and doing all that I could to stop this prick. It was easiest to just kind of bury it deep and act as if it never had happened. That unfortunately comes with consequences, and it does change you these days. I really don't trust anyone. I make up the worst intentions for people right from the get-go. I'll never forgive him, that's for sure, and could care less if he died a painful death. I'll admit that I've grown from it and have moved on, but it still does sting a little, knowing that he never faced the punishment that he deserved. I was reading a story that's reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. In the second half of 1998, I'd taken a job as a security guard at a plant that's made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked 1 or 3 shifts, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., 12 and 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job. For the most part, we did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed, and things went by in an almost painfully normal manner. For 6 months I worked saved, bought a car and planned to move. By late March of '99, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older than us, was quiet and polite, though something did seem to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he just didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I just kind of chalked it up to him being awkward, but that wouldn't last. So one night near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong immediately. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Now not sure what had occurred. I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask, so during their trip everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint and a landing on top of a flight of stairs. When the mood just shifted, she told me that she turned around, only to find that he was right on top of her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said that it would all be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin each time with me. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came in, went though with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amir stayed in the locked office, and the same thing after that night too. Then, on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out because she found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked that night. And next to me recalled the jail to just make sure that they were still holding him, and based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job. So it was to 10 years ago. My best mate and I scored the deal of the century. Liv and her parents recently purchased and refurbished home for cheap as chips rent so that the property wasn't considered unoccupied and their insurance still covers it. They were planning on selling their house in the country and moving closer to town in a year. But when they spotted this place, it was perfect. So they snapped it up. They couldn't be bothered dealing with Rondo tenants for a year. So we were off at it, and we took. It was a lovely old mid-Victorian style house with a hallway running the majority of the length on the left side and 3 bedrooms and a bathrooms and a bathroom coming off that hallway. To the right at the back of the house was an open plan and kitchen and a backyard. It was an inner Melbourne suburb, so it was totally fenced in with 6-foot fence on 3 sides, and the front had a curtsy white picket fence. On the right side of the property, an outdoor gravel pathway was wedged beside the bedroom walls and the fence line. It began with a gate in the front yard and ran the length of the property to the backyard. This is important for later too. So my mate obviously scored the master bedroom at the front, with lovely vertical opening bay windows facing in the front garden in the street. Mine had the next bedroom with a window facing the gravel path and the fence, and the third bedroom was our study. We lived here for close to 10 months. I think pretty much in total bliss. Great house, great company, and even though the area was considered a little bit dicey, the location was just stellar. Now, one hot summer's night, we said our goodnight and I hit the hay and zoned out immediately. My housemate stayed up in bed to read for a bit with just her bedside light. She was doing that for just over an hour before she heard a weird kind of SC-arted scratch on the front window of her bedroom. Initially, she put it down to an overhanging tree branch. till she realized that there was no overhanging tree branch there. She sat, kind of frozen in fear, blankly staring at her book for what felt like an eternity, till she heard the noise again, and again slowly looking up. Now she saw a dude wearing a hoodie trying to open a window, looking her dead in the eyes. As she screamed, jumped out of bed and right into my room. I woke up super dazed as she was pulling my hand and kind of whisper yelling, "You know, the one that someone was trying to break in." She had a tendency to be a little bit overdramatic sometimes, but I swear to you that I've never seen someone look so genuinely terrified. I went to grab my phone to call the cops, but we just went completely still and we heard the distinct crunching sound of someone walking down the side path of the house. We both rolled off my bed onto the floor and went completely still. The crunching continued, getting closer to my bedroom window. Now I don't know what it is about distinct sounds at night when it's otherwise quiet, but it sounded definite. And then I realized why it was so loud, because my window was wide open. I jumped up, slid the window down and slammed the lock shut. Just as he reached that window, he looked at me, but he didn't react at all. He just calmly tried to open the window, but when he realized that he couldn't, then he continued down the pathway to the backyard. I was thoroughly myself now, and my housemate was sobbing in the floor, looking up at me like a bunny about to be torn apart by a fox. I sprinted to the back door to, thankfully, find it locked and ran back to my room and immediately called the cops. I don't know what the cops knew that we didn't, but they must have broken his speed record to arrive. All of 3 minutes later, both lights and sirens off. We saw them go down the side path, guns drawn straight to the backyard. There were some noises from the yard. Then a knock at the door a moment later, and the police identified themselves, turns out. The dude had the back fence and impressive feet, and another patrol car was headed to the next street over to look for him. The 2 cops at our place asked if we were okay, then asked if they could come in and take a look around. The cops were honestly amazing, but they managed to calm us down while making sure the place was safe, and I was just really impressed with how they handled the situation. I offered them a cup of tea, which they politely declined as they took our statements, and they asked if there was anyone that we could stay with tonight. My housemate and I stayed at our boyfriend's place for a few nights after that, and when we stayed in the house it was just never the same. After that we felt completely violated and ended up moving out. A few weeks after that, we never found out if the dude was actually caught, but strangely enough, there was a random stabbing a few nights after the incident at the train station, to streets open. If it was related or not, I don't know. But all I can think is that we were very lucky that it went the way that it did. Whenever I took the bus for school, I was pretty alone on the bus rides. We did have other kids, but the highest amount of kids in the bus was probably around 5 or something, including me. I was the only one from my school on there, but all the other kids went to the same school. I should also mention, too, that I've had it out for different bus drivers in my time, and the one that I'm about to talk about lost her husband about a year before and was out for a long time. Anyway, this takes place for 5 years ago now. I was pretty young still for morning rides. We dropped off the other kids. We were heading to my school and we were the only ones on the road, when the bus suddenly stops on the side of the road. I was really confused and I thought the bus had broken down. Being the shy kid that I was, I didn't say anything and I just kind of waited. My bus driver then randomly opened the door and I started to feel a bit uneasy. For some reason we weren't at my school yet, so why was she opening the door? And she was just staring at the door for like 10 minutes. When I finally asked her, "Excuse me, are you okay?" "There's a man there," she said in such a low voice that it gave me chills. But when I looked, there was no man there or no person at all. She just kept staring for a couple of seconds. when she finally closed the door and just continued driving down the road. She wasn't my bus driver after the year, and quite honestly, I kind of miss her. She was a very sweet lady. But that moment I don't know what it was about it. But it still freaks me out. I sometimes think that the man that she was talking about was maybe her husband. I don't know. I don't know why she stopped the bus like that and opened the door for a stranger, but it was weird. I attended a pretty awful university in the UK. In fact, it was so awful that Vice even published an article written by a student that attended at the same time as me, titled "The 3 Years of Hell at the University of Wolverhampton." I lived in a student building in the middle of the city. Of the 3 student buildings available, it was the middle choice, but literally it was situated in the middle of the 3, and also figuratively, it was the middle, not as fancy as the fancy one, but not as unbearable as the worst one. Most of my friends lived in the fancy building, and to get there I had to walk a small track through a residential part of the city. But somehow my friends found a shortcut. You could actually cut through and climb up at the back of the garden behind this abandoned house. I think to get there in less than half the time. And so I started using this shortcut all the time. And one morning I walked around towards the garden and down my shortcut and found 3 grown men just standing there. They all looked, for lack of a better word, thuggish and quite large. I added a small "oh" when I saw them, and they looked up at me, a pale 19-year-old gay country boy with a blonde mohawk. I think that I apologized for barging in on what I was pretty sure was a drug deal, and I turned to walk back the way that I came and take the long way around. As I walked away, one of them shouted to get my attention. I ignored them, and then I heard them coming after me, so I started to run pretty quickly. I was much younger, slimmer and fitter back in those days, so I managed to outrun them pretty easily and sprinted all the way around the long route to my friend's building where they let me in. I explained what had happened, and no one was surprised. I mean, this was Wolverhampton. After all, a few minutes later, a friend of ours arrived. He lived at a non-university student building off campus and had to walk a different way to get to where we were. When he arrived, he asked me, "Kyle, what did you do, man?" I asked him why, and he said that an enormous guy had come up to him and asked if he'd seen a guy with a blonde mohawk. But my friend acted dumb, even though he immediately knew who had been talking about. My poor choice of hairstyle was fairly distinct. The worst part, though, the guy was carrying a brick in his hand. It still gives me shivers all these years later, but it doesn't end there. So me and my friends went out for a day out to Birmingham. Bright lights, big city, whatever. And we didn't get home until late. We got back to their building and drank until way after midnight. I started to relax and forgot my horrible ordeal from earlier that morning. At some point, more than a little drunk, I decided to head home. I was now pretty sure that I would never take the shortcut again, so I just took the long way home. Instead, as I was walking through the residential area, a car stopped on the opposite side of the road, and there were 2 guys inside, and the car was filled with smoke and just stank of weed. When they rolled down the window to speak to me, I didn't have headphones or anything, and I was the only person on the street, so I couldn't just ignore them or pretend that I couldn't hear them. The driver said, "Nice hair, bud," and his friends began to laugh. "Wait, mate, do you know where we can get some food?" "I don't know." "In the city center," I said. I kept walking, trying not to show them how unnerved I was. They were facing the wrong way to drive alongside me, so the driver put the car in reverse so that they could keep pace with me. "Do you know any places? A few. There's a kebab place at the top of the road, I think." "Get in. You can show us." Yeah. Listen. Man, I'm drunk and I'm tired and I've got lectures in the morning." "Do it," I said, trying to sound casual, even though I was just about ready to piss my pants. It really hadn't been a good day. "We're going to turn around and come back and pick you up." "Wait there." "Yeah," the driver said, as the car started towards the end of the road, which was a dead end, to turn around. I heard the passenger say, "It's him. I know it's him." The car was far enough away. I broke into a sprint and ran back towards my building. I stumbled down the stairs and twisted my ankle pretty badly, but eventually managed to limp the rest of the way and got through the front door just as the car drove past. I really dread to think what could have happened that day and for the rest of my time at that god AFUL university. I prayed to never meet any of those guys again. Fortunately, I never did. When I was a junior in high school, I was quite an OD kid. I liked having colorful hair, piercings and all that kind of stuff. And the school that I went to was near Atlanta, so there weren't many people like me. I tried to find friends that liked the same kind of music and other interests that I had, and I could normally kind of push off any weird energy that people put off. Just ignore it because I just wanted some friends. Anyway, I was in gym one day hanging out with a group of weirdos, and there was a guy that I hadn't seen before. He was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt and jeans that were like a size too small. His name was Ernest. We immediately clicked with each other in a kind of platonic way because we laughed at a lot of the same things. We started hanging out in the gym together every day. People watching and making fun of people playing basketball. And it wasn't too long until he started making fun of my appearance and making me feel absolutely terrible about myself. I actually had really bad acne, like super bad in high school, and he JOK saying that I had meth skin. First strike me being me, though I kept hanging out with him, and eventually it led to hanging out after school as well. He would invite me over to his house and we only stayed in his room. He refused to let me meet his family. His parents didn't really speak English, but I still wanted to meet them anyway. Plus, I always thought that it was a little bit weird that Ines didn't know Spanish, but his siblings did, and when he would speak words it sounded Russian. He pretty much only played It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia on TV and rambled about superheroes and would always come up with these strange scenarios where he was an evil villain and how much power he could have and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, fast forward a little bit, and I get a job at a pizza place. Ernest gets the same job at this pizza place too, so inevitably we're always together. Like always, he pretty much never let me out of his grasp. And it got to a point where he took me to school every day in his PE Cruiser, which I still get chills every time that I see one of those damn shoe-shaped ass cars, and it wasn't too long after this that we started skipping school a lot. I mean, we pretty much went to school about 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe this is where it starts to suck pretty bad too. So he started pressuring me to do sexual things with him. I don't really want to get into the details, because it's pretty disturbing. But he manipulated the situation in such a way that I felt like we were in a relationship because I thought that I needed him. He really convinced me that we were a couple, but I was so repulsed by him that I never could fully accept that. He started telling our other friends that he had sex with me and that we were in a relationship too. I denied it all, and to this day I deny it. I've lied to therapists and I've lied to my friends, but right now I'm admitting to all of that. At one point, though, he ended up living with me and my family in the same room as me. He had convinced my entire family that he was gay, so he could live with me. He literally dressed up in pink and put a scarf around his neck and pranced around my aunt, trying to win her over with his fake personality. I was so used to living in chaos that this was barely a problem for me during all of this. He was such a rude piece of to me. Though, for instance, I remember asking him for a ride one day. I can't remember to we, but he said no, but for no good reason. I started getting really pissed off because he couldn't actually give me a reason, and he just kept smirking at me. He did this type of thing frequently too. We were sitting in the living room one day, and he silently got up and just drove off somewhere. Came back, walked to the living room doorway, stared at me for 15 seconds, and then walked into my room. I hear a bunch of rustling, so I storm in there thinking that he's up to something sketchy, and he's gotten completely dressed into his sleep pants, with his hands in his pocket, and he just wouldn't take his hand out of his pocket. At this point I'm kind of scared, so I force my hand into his pocket and I pull out a knife. And I don't remember how the night or the days continued after that, but that was the first thing that really creeped me out. Fast forward again, though, and I'm at my best friend Kayla's birthday party, and everyone's camping in the backyard. Ernest hated Kayla because she was way out for me in his perspective. Anyway, she got in the way of us. Apparently, and I'm sweating typing this out because this is probably one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. The sequence of events is a little bit blurry, but I do remember most of it. So I made it clear to Ernest at this point in time that we were not a thing and that he needed to let go of this fantasy. I had a crush on this boy named John, and we slept in the same tent together. Morning comes and I hear Ernest outside asking people if they knew where I was. Someone said she's in the tent with John. I was scared immediately, and I knew something bad was about to happen. He begins screaming as loud as he can, cussing all of us out and just pitching an absolute fit. And then he just storms off. He goes to his car and calls me and tells me to get in the car. Now everyone there was freaked out, and Kayla advised me not to go into the car because she knew how scary Ernest was. Just as a person, I didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable. So I figured that if I went to the car, it would ease everyone just a little bit that he wasn't there. So I went, and as soon as the car door closed, we bed off fast, and I mean really fast. I looked over at him, wide-eyed, and he screamed, crying with absolutely no expression in his face, tears streaming, but completely emotionless. It was really weird. He says to me, "You were supposed to love me," over and over again. And he starts speeding faster and faster and said, "If I can't love you, then no one else can." I'm actively having a straight panic attack in this passenger seat. I can't hear because my ears are ringing and I can't see anything. Meanwhile, Kayla has already called my mom, and somehow my mom left the house fast enough to track us down in the PE Cruiser. And he parks at a church and my mom is watching us, and Ernest has a box cutter at his side. I get a call from my mom and I can't really remember what she said, but I know it was something along the lines of, "I'm going to kill you, Ernest." He started coming to his senses after that, if you can even call it that, and drops me back off at Kayla's and tells me that he's going to end himself. After he drops me off, Kayla and I are frantically trying to call his parents, but they can't speak English. In the end, though, he called the police on himself because he thought that he was going to harm himself or somebody else. He was gone for a couple of weeks after that, and when he came back, he was parked outside my school just waiting for me to come out. He runs up to me and I noticed that he had on a plaid button-up shirt and it was tucked into his pants, which was just extremely odd to me, and I knew immediately, too, that this was a completely fake personality. He was speaking differently as well. Color, almost like a few weeks, had turned him into a saint. It wasn't long after that I had admitted myself into a mental institution because I just kept breaking down. Everyone in the group talk told me to get rid of him, and I'd not realized just how serious this all was until I saw everyone's reactions to the stories. There are so many other stories, too, of this psycho, but I really don't have the time to type all of them out. I will say that I did get rid of him, and I found new friends, and without them I really don't know how it would have gone. I haven't seen or spoken to him in about 3 years, and I'm hoping to keep it that way. Once, when I was about 12 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a leak. I walked across the hall to the little bathroom, hit the lights, and was about to reach for the toilet, when I glanced up and saw a face in the mirror, and it wasn't mine. It was as if someone was on the other side, standing to the right, with their face right next to the glass staring at me. I only saw it for the briefest moment, but it's forever seared into my mind. I screamed and ran out of there to find my dad, and of course my dad investigated and calmed me down, or tried to. Eventually we had a prayer session because I was so freaked out, and I must have gone back to sleep at some stage fast forward in my 30s. I'd forgotten all about the event. One night, while visiting, my dad quietly brings it up and he says, "Hey, you remember that one time that you saw the face in the mirror?" It suddenly came back to me in a rush of memory, sending a chill down my spine. "Yeah, I remember that well," he said. "I sometimes think about that night." He looked down at the floor with a serious expression because I saw it too. He went on to describe exactly what I'd seen, and we still have no idea what it was. Apparently, when he investigated, he saw it and had a freak out of his own. Apparently, the prayer session was as much for his own nerves as mine, and I respect him for keeping that tidbit from me till my 30s. But I kind of wish that he never had told me this happened within the last 24 hours. So I live in a large city in the US, and like many people, I've taken it on myself to try and get back in shape during the new year. So I've recently got into running and lifting 5 days a week. Yesterday was a run day for me, and I usually start at my apartment and cross over to this long park that runs the river close to my apartment. The park is filled with sports fields, tennis courts, and many runners along the pathway too. Might have been going to it 3 times a week for just over a month now. So I was on my run last night listening to a podcast, minding my own business, and decided to go a little further than I normally do to this kind of longer stretch, where the park sort of ends for like a half mile before it picks back up again. Kind of an area where they park equipment. Many people avoid this area due to it kind of being not waterfront and kind of ugly. But I decided to run to the end of this area before circling back home. As I'm running, see a man 2 feet so ahead of me, kind of walking in my direction. Not unusual at all. I've passed like 40 people already, but this area is empty, except him and I, as most people circle back. Still though, I ride my bike here to commute for work and have never gotten weird vibes. I'm also an average built man and feel pretty secure most places in my relatively safe neighborhood. So I keep running, listening to my podcast when I notice the man's path is directly in line with me. As in, if I continue 150 more FT, I would, dead set, run into him. So I shift to the other side of the path 10 or so feet. Keep running, not paying attention, Looking back up now and he's in my path again. Still no alarms. Because, well, maybe he shifted to get out of my way too, and we did that thing where you kind of walk into each other almost. So I shift back to the side that our street started on, and this time I watch him and he shifts to my side. I'm thinking this guy must be messing with me. I'm 50 FT away now, and between there and 20 FT shifting more and more quickly, and he follows me exactly to the point that he's side street, stepping instead of moving forward. Waiting for me to reach him at this point, I take his presence in. He's 63 at the shortest, in jeans and black hoodie with a hood up. Can't really make out his face due to a streetlight behind him casting a shadow. But I begin to realize, oh. I come to a stop and go to pull my headphones out and begin the sentence. What the hell's up, man? I get to the what the hell part when he raises both arms above his head and begins to scream at me. No legible words that I can hear over my podcast at least. And I do notice that he has something long and white or beige in his hands. And at this point I begin to backtrack, keeping eyes on him. All of a sudden he dashes towards me, running with his arms stretched out to grab me. I turn and hightail it the other way. It should be known, too, that I'm not in the best shape at this point. I've had numerous injuries requiring surgeries. I've just done about 75 of my intended run for the night. But I can tell you that I've never run faster. He can pace, though, and close much of the distance. But when we started doing slight uphill, I continued to make ground. We came to a fork in the path. After about a minute of this, The two paths circled around the fenced area that contained a construction vehicle or mowers, etc., and I made it look like I was going one way, at the very last moment dashed the other way. The paths kind of made a circle, so I was able to get far enough ahead to where he couldn't see me via the fence and bushes, and when I felt like it was my chance, I dove into a bush, clawed my way under the fence and crawled through the space, and at the other side of the fence he kept looking for me in the bushes, prowling back and forth, and finally saw me on the other side of the enclosure. And at this point I was already on the phone with the police trying to get help. As dove down, breaths of air were continuing. I was also warning other runners, and he eventually just followed my pace opposite side of the fence. He kept ducking into darker areas around the enclosure, and eventually I just lost sight of him. I began getting worried again, and kept wandering around warning people while I was waiting on the cops. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I just pieced the hell out of there as the cops said that they were close. The J home was horrible, and any time a runner passed me, I would have a mini panic attack. I was kind of in shock, I think, and running off adrenaline the remainder of the night. I'm not really sure what happened or what was going on. It felt like it was something from a movie. Today I checked the CDC app and Twitter to see if anything had happened, and I'm not sure if it's related. It most likely isn't. But 5 hours after I called the cops, he pulled the body of a man out of the river, a mile downriver from where the attempted attack initially occurred. This is something that I share with new people that I meet sometimes, but obviously no one believes me. My family moved to a new house in 2011. I was 17 or 18 years old at the time. It's one of the first houses built in town, and it's very old. But we found newspapers, in fact dating back to events of Russian Revolution. And yes, I live in Russia. I must say that the house itself has different extensions built much later, and basically the oldest wooden part of the house is right in the middle in the part of the house that we own, or rather I should say apartment. We have only one wooden room on the first floor. When we moved in, I decided to choose that oldest said room, and I remember feeling like I just wasn't welcome there from the very first day. Quite honestly too, I really didn't put much thought into it at first, but it very quickly got very spooky. So I remember seeing objects move on their own, a rope crawling on its own underneath my bed while I sat on it, footsteps at night, weird buzzing sounds that I once recorded on a camera. And once I witnessed a sheet of paper stealthily crawl from the top surface of the desk to drawers as I was sitting in. It was evening and the desk lamp was on, but it didn't spook me too much. But it kind of made me indignant. Like, what the hell is this for real? I grabbed the sheet of paper from whenever Force was holding it, and I just kind of chuckled in disbelief. But each day just got a little more terrifying, and the two worst events that I remember go as follows. So it's midnight and I'm in bed just trying to fall asleep, and something's bothering me and I feel eyes on me, but my own eyes are closed. I decided to open them, and I note that there's a floating face of a man right above my bed, with thick eyebrows, angry expression, just a head staring at me and no body. We locked on for a minute in silence, and I was too afraid to move. Eventually, though, I forced myself to rush out of the room, and that night I slept with my mom, like I was 5 years old again in the second one. I was actually having a dream, and I can't recall all the details, but all I remember is it was about a kid around 8 years old, I think. Skinny light blue top and dark blue shorts. I remember drawing it at the time too, because the dream just felt really surreal. And anyway, I suddenly woke up and I thought to myself it must be around 3 a.m., and I decided to check my phone to see if I was right. And the moment that I flinched, I heard loud and clear someone running away from my bed towards the hall. Luckily, eventually I moved to the second floor, but it was probably the scariest year of my life. It seems like whatever it was, it kind of deliberately avoids newer parts of the house and for some reason sticks with the old. I don't know, no. But nobody lives in that room anymore, and it's just a bit of a guest room now. So I guess that whatever's in there might be heavy now. About 3 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now ex, as she had always expressed interest but never had been. The spot that we went to was in the Huron National Forest, and here my go-to trail or camp spot, as it's hidden deep in the forest and the access to the trails is close and easy for us. My family has not been going to this spot for about 6 years now, and my friends had introduced me about 10 or so years. But we went for a weekend trip, and I'm glad that we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite. But they were just kind of stargazing and ended up leaving at some point. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to occur. At first it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high-pitched and sounded as it just kind of kept going. After a while, we both kind of got a little bit scared and went into the tent to try and sleep. And that was when the laugh of the noise moved up higher and then started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just all of a sudden stopped and then started again at around 3 a.m. When it started again, the fire was going out. So I went and stoked the fire with my shotgun in hand and turned on the flashlight to see if maybe I could see any coyotes or something around the campsite. But when I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This all went on until 6 a.m. and then stopped. And that was finally when we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So we just kind of packed up. Once we're all packed up and good to go, I go to start my vehicle and it's just completely dead. That really freaked me out, as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged and that kill the battery. And I made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged. Yet somehow the battery just still died. I was able to get junk from a AAA. The phone call was hard to explain, and the lady who took the call didn't believe me. But at the end we both just laughed at it. But after that happened, I told my friend, who had shown me the campsite and also has a cabin in the same forest, roughly 25 miles away from that campsite, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about the incidences which he has had, one at the campsite and one at this cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after we had all returned from trail riding and went to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance. And when he did, he saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. He described them as kind of bioluminescent in size, and he flashed his high-powered flashlight at them. But when he did, there was nothing there. And as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were there again, looking right back at him. So he just packed up and went right to bed. That night, he didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. Plus he wasn't sure if we would believe him. At the cabin, though, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside, when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from a trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height the eyes were looking at them, whatever it was had they have been at least tested and tall, if not taller. They started shooting at it with their rifles 2330s and the eyes disappeared. But once they were done, they reappeared and were closer. This time, at that point, they both freaked out and went back into the cabin, and they didn't leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all of us have felt very scared when these events were happening. After we all talked about it, one of the brothers thinks that it's a Wendigo. I really don't know what to believe about that, and I don't know what it could be, but I haven't felt this scared since that night. This is something that I didn't realize the severity of until I was much older. So my mom had left me and my brother home alone one day. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13 or so, I think. So I must have been around 9 years old. I was watching him play Xbox in that living room. He had his headset on talking to his friends, when there was a knock from the door in our carport. I run and answer the door without looking, and it's a grown man that I've never seen before. were separated by the screen door, which at the time was actually unlocked. He asks, "Hey kid, are your parents home?" And horror just immediately washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from the cardboard, which is strange in and of itself. A stranger would knock on our front door, right? Plus, our carport is empty. But we only had one car and my mother had taken it. And I have a feeling that this man knows that my parents aren't home. I'm afraid I really don't know why. But I was immediately scared. My brother in the other room comes to mind. And while I've never had a father figure, my brother has always been the one who has made me feel safe. He was the strongest person in the world to me. Someone who would protect me in any situation. How most people would regard their father. I think anyway. I feel as though I can barely speak and I'm wide-eyed, and I manage to stutter out eventually. "No, but my big brother's here." Without even a moment's pause, this man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it, like an act of God or divine intervention of some sort. And reaches out from behind me over my shoulder and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence. The man tells my brother that he was looking to buy some crappy old swing set that was in our front yard at the time, and eventually my brother closes the door and just goes back to his headset and continues playing. I sit down as well and I just continue watching him, and I don't believe we ever told that mom for some reason. Luckily, I never encountered this person again, and it pretty much fades from my memory. But as I got older, it did become one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Creepy. And not so much because of what happened, but what could have. It was just really unnerving how absolutely oblivious we were to the whole situation. I like to think that the man was planning to lock me in a room, rob the place and leave. But boy, why people can be really evil sometimes. So who knows? This happened to me a couple of years ago when my now husband and I were living in a townhouse in a pretty decent area. My husband was working third shift as a corrections officer at our local corrections facility, and I was working as a waitress or a bartender. It was an unusually warm night for mid-March, so I took advantage and decided to take my husband's 80-pound Alaskan Malamute Iberian Husky mix on a quick walk around the neighborhood near our complex. We get to the end of the street that leads into the complex that we live in, and across the street is a Marathon gas station. I noticed as the dog Luke stops to relieve himself, and there's a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I have my phone out, texting a friend, and look back up to notice the guy was near the stop sign, also relieving himself from the sign. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away, and I led Luke down the street on our path. At this point, I think this guy noticed us too, and he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I hear him walking a few feet behind me and just keep my head down, staring at my phone, with Luke GLU to my hip. After about 10 seconds, I hear this guy's steps getting closer. Luke realized, too, that there's someone behind us, and he stops in his tracks. Mind you, he is a big dog compared to my 50 self, but I can handle him pretty easily, and he's very well trained by my husband. But I noticed his ears were perked up and his tail was straight up. I was glad that he was aware of the surroundings, but I still wanted to keep moving on away from this guy. I don't know, I just got a weird feeling. This guy finally catches up, though, so I tighten my grip on Luke's leash and pull him closer to me and step into the grass to allow this guy to pass us and keep Luke out of his way. But does this guy keep going and pass us? No, when I thought that he was about to pass us, I started out a small apology because Luke was pulling on his leash a little to investigate this guy. And most people did get intimidated by him, just by his size. Like I said, he's a pretty big dog in my opinion. But the guy stops and just kind of stares at me for a minute, long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and the booze rolling off of him and to notice that he's probably in his mid to late 20s, dark hair, scruffy looking and just kind of really dirty. He smiles, though, and finally seems to notice Luke trying to get to him and asks, "Cute dog. What's his name?" Instead of making up a name, I just said Luke. He then proceeds to ask me if he can pet my dog, and before I can even give him an answer, he leans down to start petting Luke's head, and Luke did not like that one bit. Luke jumped at him as a warning, and the guy backed up kind of chuckling. I apologized and mentioned that he was very protective and made up a lie that he was trained as my dad's former canine unit. My dad is a software developer, by the way, but instantly I saw this guy's face change. I don't know what to call it, but he looked a little bit put off by that. He asked me what my name was and I gave him a fake one. He then asked if I lived around here, and I said that I was visiting a friend of mine for the weekend. He then made a sudden step towards me, and I'm not lying when I say that I have never heard my husband's dog growl in the 5 years that I've been with him. But the sound that came from my dog sounded like something straight out of a horror film. Luke's hair was spiking on his spine now, and he was throwing himself up on his back legs and kicking his front legs at this guy. He had put himself completely between myself and the guy and was now snapping at him. This freaked the dude out so much that he stumbled backward, nearly dropping his beer. He quickly said, well, have a nice night, cutie, and then just stumbled off down the road. When I say my heart was pounding, it was deafening, and I grabbed Luke's leash so hard and sprinted between the buildings until I go back to my townhouse and locked all the doors and collapsed by the front door. Luke was in my face the whole time, kissing me and whining. This dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature that I've ever met, and hearing him growl and seeing him react the way that he did made me realize that I needed to get out of that situation, and fast. Back in the 80s, my parents bought a camping trailer, and every summer my family, Mom, Dad, and 2 brothers, we would all go camping. Often a few of my cousins and aunt would also tag along. Sometimes it would be a weekend trip, and other times it would stay for a week at a time. Most camping trips were up in an age. It was so much fun, and for most of my childhood nothing really crazy happened at all. But one morning I woke up and noticed that my cousin or best friend was sleeping in the same bunk as me. I didn't think much about it, but as I pushed her to let her know that I was getting up, she said, "Are you really awake this time?" I said yeah to her strange question and went to the front of the camper to get a drink. My mom and aunt were sitting outside the camper having coffee, and when I went out to say good morning, they said, "Come talk to us." I walked outside and could tell that my mom looked upset, like she'd been crying. My aunt was a bit shaky as she asked, "Do you remember what happened last night?" I shook my head, no, and listened, as my aunt told me about the extremely strange night, which I do not recall whatsoever. My aunt explained that at about 2 a.m. she woke up to the door to the camper being wide open. She quickly checked the bunks and noticed that I was nowhere to be found. She woke up my mom and dad, and then my mom and dad got flashlights and started frantically searching for me outside around the immediate area. My aunt stayed behind because there were still 4 kids sleeping in the camper, and after a scary 10-minute search, my dad finally spotted me. I walked out of the camper and into the trees, about 30 feet away. It was far enough that I could not be seen unless he walked into the trees a bit, and I was just standing out there in the dark with my eyes completely open, but not responding to him at all. I had no shoes, no flashlight, and was wearing just shorts and a t-shirt. He said that he grabbed my hand and started walking me back to the camp, and he remembers asking me, "Hey, what's going on? Why in the world would you come out here on your own like that?" Then I finally spoke up and said, "I need to wait here. Dad, let's just stay here." My mom remembers that. I then started crying, as she and my dad let me go back to the camper. Whenever I think back to this story, I get a strange feeling too, but thank God that my aunt woke up when she did. It's important to note, too, that I've never been known to sleepwalk before or after that night. Since then, it truly was an isolated incident which could have had a very different ending had I not been so lucky. My mom was so upset that she decided to get rid of that trailer, and we didn't do much camping after that night. So I used to be naively helpful to all sorts of strangers and even often picked up hitchhikers, solo ending groups and get them where they needed to go. When I was 19, I had moved to Huntington, a college town in West Virginia, and I worked at a popular bar at the time. My shifts would start around 9 p.m. and end at about 2 a.m. I didn't really know anybody in this town or state even, and I'd been there on my own for only a month or so at this stage. So on one of these nights, one of the customers had taken an interest in conversing with me while I was working my shift. Me, being a good employee, conversed pleasantly back. He was in his 30s or 40s, buzzed white hair with a group of other guys, all of them tattooed with leather jackets. Nothing against leather or tats, as I had and wear both. In fact, just giving a visual detail. Now he'd been there, going back and forth, between them at their table and me at the bar, pretty much talking to me non-stop, for a good couple of hours, around 130 yen. He mentions that he doesn't know where his friends went. I look up oblivious and see the whole bar had virtually cleared out. He was right, though not one of his buddies was in sight. He says that they must have all gotten drunk and just forgot about him leaving him there. The man is clearly bummed and quite concerned because, as he tells me, he lives almost an hour away from here and has no way of getting home now, and it's the middle of winter, so it's snowing pretty hard. He spends the next few minutes on the phone, calling different friends that were at the bar with him, but no one is answering. He's pretty clearly screwed and I can't leave him in the bar. I can't in good conscience leave the men out in the snow either. So now I've got to drive this stranger home in a place that I'm unfamiliar with, in conditions that I've never really driven him before, no snow in my home state. I tell him, don't worry, though, and when I finish clearing the bar and closing up, I'll take him home, and I do. We get in the car and he gives me directions. As we go, we're talking casually, like we had been for quite some time. Just some superficial conversation. Nothing, even hinting at sexual or flirty. I'm not a flirty person at the best of times, so I'm positive that there is no misunderstanding here either. Keep in mind too, it's like 2 in the morning. No one knows where I am. All that I'm with this rondo, and it's snowing heavily now. And, as we're chatting, I suddenly feel this hand on the back of my neck. It was such an unpleasant feeling. It was truly such an unpleasant feeling. I remember his fingers swirling in the little hairs at the bottom of my hairline, which were too short to make into sort of a ponytail. I scratched my neck, though, and just calmly said I had a knife. As I kept looking forward driving, the swirling ceased, but the hand lingered on my skin again. Calmly, but more firmly, I said I have a knife. He removed his hand and we kept driving. I figured whatever that was is handled, and we get back to our conversation. Minutes later, though, I feel his hand fully against the back of my neck again, his fingers wrapped gently around its curve. I scrunched my neck again and said, seriously, I have a knife. He removed his hand once more and then, in a very hurt tone, he said, are you really scared of me? After that he kept his hands to himself and it was a long 1-hour drive. But I did get him home and after that I took off. I'm 29 now and it wasn't until many years later did it occur to me. The whole thing was probably a setup that he and his friends had planned. They probably left him stranded so that the chick that he's been talking to all night will have to take him home, opening the door for sex, consensual or maybe not. I guess the moral of the story here is, don't let people you don't know into your car. Oh, and also always carry a knife. This happened at a large shopping center in Adelaide, South Australia, a couple of months ago. But for some context too, it was around 7 p.m. on a late trading night, already completely dark outside. So I was shopping with my partner and she went into a clothing store both to make some returns and also try on some replacement clothes. I knew that it was going to take a little bit of time, and I'm not overly interested in women's clothing. So I stood outside in the very busy center and was responding to some work emails on my phone, paying very little attention to all of the people walking past. After about 5 minutes, I was approached by a fairly young looking gentleman, early to mid-20s at most, time 23 myself, with a very strong European accent, possibly French, who said to me something along the lines of, "You were with a girl." "Yes, she was looking for you. She came up to me. I think because we are wearing similar shirts and thought you were," me thinking back at it. Other than buttons on our shirts, they were not really similar at all. But he told me that he was trying to find me and made it seem like something was wrong and insisted that he could show me where she went. I looked into the store and couldn't see my partner. It was a fairly small clothing store inside the center. You could see all of it from outside. In fact, I found out later that she was just in a changing room, but I was extremely confused at the time. My partner knows that I would just be aimlessly pacing in circles outside, as I do when I'm reading emails, and would never walk off looking for me, not to mention that she could have just texted or called. Although confused, he was moving away fast enough that I didn't have time to ask many questions, and not being able to see my partner convinced me to at least follow where he was going. There had been hundreds of people around, so I wasn't very worried for my own well-being, and as I followed the gentleman, I was leaving a good 2 or so meters between us walking behind. I don't remember feeling overly unsafe or concerned about being near him. Just extremely confused and kind of unsure. I suppose he could see that, and kept repeating something along the lines of, "This isn't a joke. Please believe me. I want to help. Come with me. She went this way. I saw where she went." We'd only been walking for about 10 seconds at this point, but covering a fair bit of distance from the store that I was originally at. I said something like, "Where was she going? What did she say to you?" And he told me, "Sorry, my English isn't very good. She's this way." We kept walking like this for another 10 seconds before we reached the doors to the building. We were on a side of the center that has doors leading to both the car and a large loading dock for one of the supermarkets. Although busy in the center, there was almost no one around the doors going in or out, and he walked straight outside and said something along the lines of, "She was sitting just on this bench." I don't know where she went other than a small bit of light under the cover where a bench is. It was completely dark. As soon as you walked any further away, I walked up to the point where the automatic doors open, but no further, and looked 1 foot outside, 1 foot inside, and he said something like, "She must have walked this way. Come, I'll help you find her," and started to walk left, which only leads to a dark and secluded loading dock, not visible from the doors. You could tell the urgency that he was trying to convey to follow him now, though I was already very confused and unsure up until that point. But as soon as it happened, I knew that whatever he wanted me to follow him down there for wasn't going to be good. It was one of those moments where you pieced it all together finally, and realized how many warning signs you somewhat noticed that ignored, and I instantly felt like I was in danger. I remember saying, "All good. Thank you, thank you. I'll call her," and just turning straight around and walking back inside. I turned around after a few seconds and couldn't see him outside anymore, although it felt like a long time. Thank you so much for joining me in the world of midnight dark stories. I hope these tales have sent shivers down your spine and sparked your imagination. Remember to subscribe, like, and share your scariest thoughts in the comments. Until the next time we meet in the darkness, keep the thrill alive.